Today we're talking about Writing Task 1 Academic, and specifically we're going to talk about stacked bar charts. This is a really good example that brings together a lot of concepts that are important for Writing Task 1. We approach one of these tasks by first analyzing the chart and trying to find the main patterns. So the mindset you should put yourself into is to ask yourself, why did the designer make this graph? What did the designer want to show us? So in this case, we'll start with the title. It says the chart below shows the percentage of total U.S. population aged 65 and over between 1900 and 2000. Now, IELTS wants us to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and to make comparisons where relevant. So let's have a look what's in here. We've got the heading. It says percent of total U.S. population 65 and over. And then below here, we notice we've got a legend. We've got three groups, 65 to 74-year-olds, 75 to 84-year-olds, and 85-plus-year-olds. So our 65 and over population has been subdivided into three age groups. Thankfully, this chart is pretty straightforward, and it gives us a really easy way to organize this information. We can talk about these three different groups separately. So what is the best way to organize our writing for Writing Task 1? Well, a formula that works really well is this. We'll start with our introduction. What goes into the intro? Two things. The first line of the intro is the context, and the second line is what's known as the general overview. So, two parts. For the context, you just want to paraphrase the prompt. That's all it is. IELTS gives you the information in the prompt, and you need to simply put it in your own words. This is the most general description of the graph. It's what the graph is about. And in the second part, in the general overview, we describe the main patterns that we will talk about in detail in the body paragraphs. So the structure is very similar to Writing Task 2. Again, in Writing Task 2, in the intro, you start by paraphrasing the prompt, and that gives you the context. Then you follow up with a thesis statement, which summarizes your position and the main reasons for the position. Well, here, because it's not an argument, we don't call it a thesis, but it's a general overview that summarizes the main patterns in the graph. So let's start with paraphrasing the prompt. I'm just going to take this and copy it here. So you can't just copy the prompt because that's not your words. You have to put it in your own words. What works surprisingly well is just to keep the same structure and to paraphrase it part by part. So let's have a look here. We're just going to take this piece by piece. So the chart, the diagram below, we don't need to say below, depicts the proportion of the population in the United States that is aged 65 and older. Now, before I continue, let's just have a look to see what IELTS actually wants us to include in the general overview, because it's right up here. They want us to give a clear overview of the main trends, differences, and stages. So we're going to have to include a bit more information than is just included here. That's not quite enough. So what we also want to mention is the fact that it's divided into 3 age groups. And just for development purposes, we're going to include that the information is coming from the U.S. Census Bureau. Okay, so the diagram depicts the proportion of the population in the United States that is age 65 and older, divided into 3 age groups, and then we can include them. We can say 65 to 74, 75 to 84, and 85 plus. 65 to 74, 75 to 84, and 85 plus. And we're going to include the Census Bureau based on information from the U.S. Census Bureau. All right, and now it's time to do the general overview. So we got to summarize the 3 patterns that we're going to discuss. Information proceeds from general to specific. So I would start by talking about this number at the top, which is the total percentage of the population that these 3 groups constitute. So we'll start with that. Now, what causes a lot of problems for people is these percentages. So there are 2 things going on. There are absolute changes in percentage, and then there are relative or proportional changes in percentage. So if we're talking about this increase from 4.1 to 12.4% of the population, we have to talk about a percentage point increase. Not percentage, but percentage point. Percentage point just treats these numbers as absolute numbers. So it went from 4.1 to 12.4% of the population. And if you take the difference, 12.4 minus 4.1, you've got 8.3 percentage point growth. So the number of 65 and over year olds didn't increase by 8.3%. Okay, let's be very clear about that. Over 100 years, the percentage of this group did not increase by 8.3%. It increased by 8.3 percentage points. So percentage points, absolute numbers, are not terribly useful for making meaningful comparisons. What IELTS needs us to do, it says make comparisons where relevant. To make meaningful comparisons, we have to talk about percentage. So what is the percentage difference between 4.1% and 12.4%? Well, this is basically triple. Okay, and if something triples in size, 4 times 3 is 12, basically tripled in size. Let's say a price triples in size, something goes from $4 to $12. So think of it this way. If a price doubles from $4 to $8, it has gone up by 100%. A 100% price increase means the price doubled. If the price tripled, that means it's gone up by 200%. If the price quadruples, it's gone up by 300%. Now, IELTS knows you don't have a calculator and that you don't have time to spend performing calculations, paper and pencil. So you use words like approximately or roughly to describe these changes, and then you're perfectly fine. So the percentage of the total U.S. population aged 65 and over increased by approximately 200%. I'd also like to know what the percentage increases are for these 3 groups, because if we're making meaningful comparisons, as we are required to do, then percentage point increases are not terribly helpful. 2.9 to 6.5% of the population, 1 to 4.4, And then for the top group, 0.2 to 1.5% of the population. It's comparing apples and oranges. You're not comparing things equally. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you've got two employees. Employee A gets a raise from $10 to $15 an hour. Employee B gets a raise from $20 to $25 an hour. Both of these are $5 increases. So that's not very useful for making a comparison. Yes, both employees received the same dollar amount raise, but so what? What does that raise represent for each one? So $5 for employee A represents a massive 50% raise, because $5 is half the salary he was getting before. For employee B, $5 over $20 is 25%. So even though they both nominally got the same amount of increase, $5, it represents double the raise for employee A compared to employee B. So that's why you need to find the percentage differences rather than just these absolute amounts, because they don't tell us anything. So we're going to use the same method to figure out the percentage differences for the other groups. And this information we're going to include, we're just going to summarize in the general overview, but then it's going to be useful for our detailed sections. So let's have a look at these three groups one by one. Start with 65 to 74-year-olds. They went from 2.9% of the population to 6.5% of the population. This is a 3.6 percentage point increase. Okay. But what does that mean in percentage change? So again, I'm going to rely on words like roughly and approximately to do a quick and dirty calculation. So I'm just going to round this to 3, round this down to 6. That's approximately doubled. Okay, so this is a 100% increase. Now for 75 to 84-year-olds, went from 1% of the population to 4.4% of the population, which is a 3.4 percentage point increase. Okay, again, doesn't tell us very much. It's very similar to the first group. But what is the actual percentage increase? Okay. Well, if something quadruples, then that's a 300% increase. So this is more than quadrupled. It's 3.5 times higher. It's 4.5 times higher. So this is a 350% increase. So already, proportionately speaking, this group saw a much bigger increase in its share of the population. And finally, for those 85 and over, they went from 0.2% of the population to 1.5%. Okay, so that's 1.3 percentage points difference. Okay, it seems really, really small. But proportionately, this is a 650% increase. Okay, so this, right? And we're going to use, in this case, this is a precise number because it's a nice round number. We're going to put approximately 100% increase roughly 350% increase. Okay, we have to use these words because we're not claiming to be super precise. Okay, so despite these numbers, look, this one had the biggest percentage increase. And the one that had the largest percentage point increase actually had the smallest proportional increase. Okay, so I've summarized this here in the general overview. Generally speaking, it can be clearly seen that the percentage of those aged 65 and up tripled in the given period, but the biggest growth rate was seen among those aged 85 plus, followed by those in the 75 to 84-year-old group, and then the 65 to 74 group. And this tells us exactly what the organization of our essay is going to be. Body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, and body paragraph 3. Let's get started with the body paragraphs then. This is the pattern I'm going to follow. I'm going to start off with a topic sentence that gives general information, and this will be the percentage point difference. I will support that information with data from the graph, which is a requirement of the task. A common problem is that people just describe the general pattern, but they don't support their general description with specific data from the graph. So you definitely want to support your ideas with data. And we're going to end each body paragraph with a meaningful comparison, which is going to be our percentage comparison. We're going to talk about what percentage of the population each group represents. If you're stuck on how to begin a paragraph, I'm going to give you 3 super useful phrases. These are in terms of, with respect to, with regard to. These 3 phrases, they mean the exact same thing. They signal to your audience that this is what you're going to focus on now. So let's say you're comparing 2 products on 3 different criteria. In terms of quality, this product is better. In terms of cost, this product is cheaper. In terms of warranty, this one has a longer warranty. With regard to colors, this one has a greater selection of colors available. So you use these to signal that you're changing the focus point of what you're talking about. So we can begin our paragraphs with these if we're stuck. Okay, so this is what I've got for my first body paragraph. We're starting with the 85-year-old group as per our general overview. In terms of the 85-plus-year-old group, it increased during the period of the study from 0.2 to 1.5% of the population. This group did not increase as a percentage of the population over the first 3 decades, remaining at 0.2% of the population, but then it grew steadily starting from the 1940s. Although this group constituted the smallest share of the U.S. elderly population, it saw the largest growth rate, increasing by 650% over 100 years. Okay, moving on to our second body paragraph, which is 74 to 85-year-olds as per our general overview. With respect to 74 to 85-year-olds, this group grew from 1 to 4.4% of the U.S. population. Growth was slow until 1930, But then starting in the 1940s, it picked up and continued to show steady increases of just under half a percentage point per decade over the rest of the studied period. This is where I'm getting it from. So growth was slow, 1.1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and here it picks up in 1940. Here it's half a percentage point increase, but these are all 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, so I'm calling it just under half a percentage point increase per decade. Our comparison, this age group showed the second highest growth rate, experiencing a total increase of 350%. Very briefly, let's talk about how to use this kind of model for improving your own writing skill. A traditional way of improving writing that many writers have talked about is to simply take a text that you wish to model and copy it out longhand, not on a computer, but paper and pen. Write it out, pay attention to what you're doing, read it out loud a few times to yourself. This will get the writing style into your bones, so to speak. Another method that is also effective, I would use both. I strongly suggest you use both. Copy out the models longhand, but also use what I call a modified Ben Franklin approach. So what we do is we take the model. So this is the model response. And what I've done here is I just transformed it into point form. Exact same information, same order, it's just in point form. So I've removed a lot of the grammar, a lot of the structural language, the articles, a bunch of prepositions, a lot of the conjugation of the verbs has been changed, has been simplified. So what you do with this kind of model is to try and rewrite the original version of the text. This allows you to compare your version with the original, and you can then critique it. You can say, oh, mine is exactly the same as the original. Oh, in this situation, I think the way I described this part of the graph is actually better than the original, but in this part over here, I think the original is better than mine. So by critiquing your version of the text in this way, you'll improve your writing skills. And if you're in my course, just post your version of this in the forum and I'll check it and provide feedback. Okay, I hope that helped. I look forward to seeing your writing. Take care.